Event handling with anonymous classes. If you have a number of buttons that do almost the same thing, you can create one listener for all the keys. However, there is no need to define a named class simply to add a listener object to a button. We can use anonymous classes to add or to handle events for our components. For example, we have this code that uses an anonymous class. For example, we have a form and we want to convert the text on the button to uppercase. So we have a text field and we get the text from the text field and we want to display that text on the button in the uppercase. But here as we can see, we can use the action listener classes. We are creating an object of the action listener class without implementing that class. This is an example of the anonymous class. Although we do not define the class, what the compiler does is the compiler creates names for anonymous classes. The enclosing class named followed by the dollar symbol followed by a number. For example, this is the name of our class where we are defining or using an anonymous class. So it uses this symbol, the dollar symbol, and adds the number. That can be, for example, if we have one anonymous class, this or the first one, this should be 1, and for the second one, it should be 2. We understand that whenever we compile our code or Java file, a class file is created for our classes. That is the name of our class followed by the dot symbol and stored with the class. So for the anonymous classes, this is how a class file will be created if you or when you run the code for your Java file that contains an anonymous class. An anonymous class, as we can see, is used without declaration. It has no name. For example, we have a situation that the user presses enter in the first JText field, the button displays the corresponding text in uppercase. We saw an example of this in our previous slide. So what should happen is that when we have this text field, JText field, and when we click this button, what should happen is whatever the text in this text field is should be displayed on this button in the uppercase. And we have another example that the user presses enter and the second JText field, the J button displays this hello and followed by the corresponding text in this text field. So we have these two scenarios where we will see how we can use anonymous classes to handle these events. Two different event handling procedures inside the action performed method. If we use a local class, then we will need to use the get source to return a reference to the event source. For example, JText field 1 or text field 2. But if we use the anonymous class, we use two anonymous classes to handle the event separately. In our first case, if you want to convert to uppercase the code that we saw previously, we can use this code. So we have these variables for all of these components on our form or just this frame. We have JText field 1, JText field 2 and text field, and we have this J button, an object of the J button class. This one is. And this is an example of using an anonymous class. So what should happen is when we click on this show button, when we click on this button, the set of this button should be set to the text of the text field 1, and this is how we get the text from the text field 1. We convert it to uppercase and we set it to the button. So this is a one line simple code that will perform that event. In our second case, what should happen is it should, when we click on this button, it should read the text and concatenate it to the text in the the text. What should happen is it should add a hello at the start of the word or the start of the string, and whatever the text in the second text field is should be displayed on this button. So what we do here is we have these text fields and the button, but we are using the event we are for the JText field 1 that we saw in the previous slide. We are using a separate event handler class that is an anonymous class. We are using the object of this class, and here in this case we are using another anonymous class, two separate anonymous classes to handle the second event. That is, in this case, when we click on the second text field, what should happen is, as you can see, the action listener is associated with the text field. So when we click on the text field, the text on the button should change, and that should be set to a hello concatenated with the text in this second text field. Again, in the first one, we were associating the action to the text field 1. So when we click in the text field 1, this text on the button should change, and it should be set to whatever we have written in the text field 1, converted to an uppercase and displayed on the screen. So the action is associated with the text fields. Similarly, when we click in the second text field, this is how the text of the button should change. And you can solve this exercise as well. This JPanel contains a JButton and a text field, JText field, which initially is empty. The first time the user presses the press me button, the JText field displays you rang. The second time the user presses the press me button, the JText field displays not now. And the third time, maybe later, is displayed, then you rang again, and so on. So if you try to implement the code for this example, you will understand how events can be handled for different components. If you want to look at some examples of how these different event handlers can be used, you can look at the code that has been provided to you. You will find one example of button frame.java. For example, we have a button frame, a class button frame that extends JFrame. We want to have two buttons on that JFrame. One is a plain button object and one is a fancy button object. Both of these are the objects of the button class or JButton class. Now we have the button frame, and the testing buttons will be displayed on the top of the frame. And as we saw in our slides, that if we want to display something on top of the button, we pass that on to the constructor of the button, and we add the button to the JFrame. For example, we want to add some icons to our button. So we have a button, and now you can create your own icons, and you need to provide the whole path of that icon, where we have stored that icon on your computer maybe, and then you can provide that path to the object of the icon class. That icon will be loaded and stored in this object of the icon class. Then you can use the icon, this icon on the button. For example, we have this bug1 and the location of, if you want to see, these should be stored right where we want to use them. Otherwise you will be providing the complete path of these images that you want to use as icon on top of your buttons. As you can see, this is where I have stored the files and the images in the same folder. That is why I'm only providing the name of the image that will be retrieved and stored in this object, that is an object of the icon class. And then I create another object and I store the second image in this second object. What I want that when I move the mouse over the button, the image on the button should change, and that is what I want to do. That is the event that I want to create. If we look at the output of this code once, and then we will come back to this code again. So we have this plain button and we have this fancy button. As you can see, when I put my mouse on this button, this color, the background color of this image changes. That is basically two images that when as you can see at this code, I have the first the image with the white background stored in this first object. The image with the yellow background is stored in this second object, and I have named this button as fancy button. As we can see, the text has been added to the button, and initially it has bug1 as its icon. So I have set the image bug1 as icon of this button. Now I have set rollover icon to bug2. It means that when I roll over this button, the icon should change to bug2, and then I add this button to the JFrame. I have a handler for this event. The event that is occurring over here is, for example, I have a fancy button I have added. This is, if you remember, we are registering this event handler with this button over here. We are registering this event handler with this fancy button, and we are registering this event handler with the plain button. If I click on this plain button, it should display a message to me on the screen. You press plain button. This is the event that is associated with this plain button, and the event associated with this button is, as you can see, you pressed fancy button, and also the rollover, that is, it changes the image on the button. So we have an inner class, public class button handler, that implements the action listener. An action in our case is clicking on the button. When we click on the button, what should happen is the action performed method will be called, and as we saw that when the event occurs at this point, as we can see, a J option pane dialog box is displayed. Button frame, as you can see, you pressed and the name of the button is retrieved and displayed on the screen. That is the event associated with these buttons, as we can see. Similarly, we have this checkbox frame example that extends JFrame, and you can see the relevant classes and libraries that have been imported into this example. Now what should happen is, if we run this program, we should see what are the events that you are trying to handle in this example. So we have this JFrame, and we have a text field and two checkboxes. When I click on this checkbox, what should happen is the text in the text field should change. It should be set to bold, and when I click on this one, it should be changed to italics. If I unclick this, it should revert back to its original format. If I uncheck this bold checkbox, it should revert back to its original form. So if we look at the code, we have where we have handled these events. We have text field. For example, if we see, we have a text field, we have a bold checkbox, we have named our variables accordingly, and we have italic text checkbox. This text is displayed on top of our JFrame, and the layout is set to flow layout. So the default text in the JText field is, for example, we created this JText field and we have set the default text to this, and the size, this is the size of the text field. If you remember, we were setting this as an integer value, that was the number of columns in the text field. So this is text is displayed over here, and the default font is can be set using the font class. So we have a set font method where we can set the font of this text field, and we have set is to serif font plan, and the size is 14, and the text field is added to the JFrame. Now we have the code for the bold checkbox. As we can see over here, the text is set to bold. As you can see, the text is set to bold. We have, and these are objects of the checkbox class. We have another checkbox, and the text of that is set to italic. Thus far, we have not associated the event handlers with these buttons. We have added these buttons to the JFrame, and here we are registering the event handler to these components. So we create an object of the checkbox handler, that is our private inner class, that implements the item listener, and we associate that handler to the corresponding components. This is called, the process is called registering the handler. And what should happen is, there is a method in the item listener class. When we click on the item state changes, and we have an if statement inside that method. So if the bold checkbox is selected, for example, if we select this one, as we can see, and if both of them are selected, the font should be bold and italics. If one of them is selected, for example, if only the bold one is selected, the font should be bold. As we can see, the form of the font remains the same because we are not changing the form of the font. If only the italic is selected, the text should be set, or the font should be set to italic. Else, if we uncheck these, the text or the font should be set to the default that was already there. And once we have set the properties of this font object, then we set this to the text field using the set font method. So we set these properties, and we store these properties in the font object that we created, initialized to null, and then we can, as we can see, these events are handled inside this inner class that implements a method of the item listener interface. Similarly, we have another example that uses combo box frame, and we use the combo box button in this example, or we just simply use the combo box of the combo box class. So if we look at the code or the output of this code, what should happen is, for example, we have this combo box, and by default we have bug1 as default, that is displayed the image that is displayed, and we can read these images from our folder or our hard disk. You need to provide the complete path, and ideally you can save the images within the same folder where you have the Java file of this program. Then you can simply add the names of those images, and those images will be read into this array. Now we have all the images in this array, and what we do is we want to the names of these images are stored in this array, and we read these names one by one from our hard disk, and we store them as objects of this icon class. So you can say that we are kind of using polymorphism over here. And if we want to look at the anonymous class that we are using here, so what it does is, if we click on this one, the image is changed to that is the one that is selected in the combo box. So this is an animated one, this is a traveling bug, this is bug 2 that has a yellow background, and the default is bug 1 with the white background. So this text should appear at the top of the JFrame, and this one creates an object of the combo box. So this is one object of the combo box or combo box, and it has the names array, so these names will be displayed inside the combo box, as we can see over here. And by default we have 3 names or 3 rows displayed inside this combo box. If you change this to 4, so all of the 4 names will be displayed when you click this combo box. And here we use the anonymous inner class. A new item listener is added to this combo box anonymously, and the method is implemented. As we can see, item state changed, so it simply sets this image, or that is a label, so it sets the icon of this label to the image that is selected in this combo box. That is the event that is occurring over here. So if event get state change is equal to item that event selected, so whatever the item is selected, the icon on this label should change to that object or that image. That is what this event is. So that is was an example of using an anonymous inner class.